Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video we've got a couple of things to discuss, including a couple of signings, updates on the arbitration cases as they've now all been settled and there will be no more arbitration cases throughout the summer, and some buyout rumors. With all of those teams now finishing their arb cases, there's going to be a few buyout windows opening, and we've got some trade rumors involving the Pittsburgh Penguins, Ottawa Senators, and the St. Louis Blues. We'll get to all that coming up right now. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video here at D and Sen Hockey Channel. Now, to kick things off today, once again, we're going to start with a couple of signings that have happened over the past few days. We've had a couple of really big signings over the past couple of days. Most of them involve the arb cases that were still left, as we talked about in our last video. So we'll start there. As we talked about in our last video, our last signing we talked about was Trent Frederic, who just settled on terms before he went through with his arbitration case. Shortly after my video was taken on Tuesday, the New York Rangers signed left shot defenseman Brayden Scalin to a one-year, two-way deal with AAV essentially $75,000. Now, Scalin was scheduled to be an arbitration case on this upcoming Friday, tomorrow, so it was good to see the Rangers settle with him. Scalin seemed to be wanting to have a bigger salary at the AHL level because he's not a regular NHL player as of right now, so I don't think it's too surprising that he got league minimum on a two-way deal. But getting him signed was a big deal for the Rangers as it was their last arbitration case. So good to see the Rangers got him signed, and it's going to be interesting to see if Scalin can really improve this season and become a little bit more of a prominent defenseman in that depth chart for the Rangers. But good to see him get signed, and good to see them and Scalin avoid arbitration. After that, we did get the announcement on the Boston Bruins and Jeremy Swayman arbitration hearing. As we talked about, the Bruins and Swayman did go through arbitration on Sunday. We got the arbitration hearing finished up on Tuesday morning, just like we thought we would, and Swayman wound up getting a one-year contract with AV of $3.475 million. So that's not too bad of a contract, in my opinion. It's actually a really good contract for Swayman. I thought he would have gone a little bit higher than Samson of $3.55 million, but he just got a tad bit lower. So good to see that Swayman got that sort of a contract. It really does help with the Bruins, getting that couple extra $100,000 more than I thought they would. But still, really good signing there for the Bruins. Swayman will continue to be, at this current point in time, a 1B goalie to Allmark, and still is eventually, I think, the goalie of the future for this Bruins team. So a solid signing there for the Bruins. Swayman should continue to play 35, 40 games for the Bruins and be a solid 10 goalie with Allmark, and in time should still be the starter. So I think that's really good money for the next year. He'll be an RFA again at the end of next year, so going to be interesting to see how the contract negotiations go next year. But still, Swayman's a really good goalie, and I think that's a really good deal for the Bruins. Then later on Tuesday night, we got another arbitration case that was finished up, and that is that Ryan McLeod, who had an arbitration case also scheduled for Friday, tomorrow, was able to come to terms on his new deal with the Edmonton Oilers, signing him to a 2-year, one-way deal with an AAV of $2.1 million. So that's a solid deal for McLeod. McLeod showed last year, and actually the year before too, that he can definitely be a solid third-line center in the Oilers organization. So I think at $2.1 million is good defensively. He can put up some points offensively as well. So he's a good all-around defenseman. I think $2.1 million is pretty good for him. I thought I could have taken under $2 million because the Oilers are really a cap-strapped team right now. Some help with their cap space, but still, I think McLeod's a good third-line center. He's shown that over the past couple of years. He definitely deserves this contract. So 2 years, $2.1 million. He should be an RFA at the end of this deal, and he looks really, really good. So pretty good deal for the Oilers, and that got rid of 2 more arbitration cases for Friday. So at that point, we had 2 arbitration cases left. There was one scheduled for yesterday between Terry and the Ducks. As we said, they were far apart in their arb cases hearings. And then there was also one scheduled for tomorrow between the Penguins and Drew O'Connor. And both of them got resolved yesterday morning. First, it was Terry. There was a lot of speculation that he was going to go for a hearing, given the fact of how far apart the Ducks and Terry were. But they would actually come to terms before the hearing started. They came to terms on a 7-year deal with an AV of $7 million. So good to see that Terry was locked up long term. I think that is fantastic value for Terry. He's shown the past couple of years that he can be a really good 30, at least maybe even eventually 40 goal scorer for the Ducks, and he's a really key cog of that top 6 in Anaheim's organization. So to sign him for a long-term deal is perfect. That buys out his remaining RFA year plus a whole bunch of UFA years. So It's definitely a really good signing for the Ducks, and Terry should be a Duck for the next 2 seasons. So, really good deal for the Ducks there. Like I said, Terry hit 30 goals over the past couple of seasons. I think he's hit 60 points in back-to-back seasons too. If he continues to grow, he could definitely be, I think, like a 40-goal, maybe even 80-point player. So, I think that contract is really good for Terry, and I think that's a really good deal for the Ducks. So, avoid arbitration and sign him to a long-term deal. It's a fantastic move by the Anaheim Ducks. And then the last arbitration case, which is scheduled for yet tomorrow, between the Penguins and Drew O'Connor, also finished, as the Penguins were able to get Drew O'Connor signed to a 2-year one-way deal with an AAV of $925,000. So for O'Connor, he's been mostly a bomb six forward during his tenure with the Penguins. Signed as a college free agent with the Penguins a couple of years back. They've been mostly an AHL forward, but he's gone a couple of stints at NHL level and has not looked out of place at all. I think with the Penguins' moves, he could definitely be challenging for like a fourth line role this year. And I think he could definitely be like a solid fourth liner who puts up like maybe 10, 15 goals if he can really play really, really well, and maybe like 20, 25 points. I think he'd definitely put up something like that. So, in my opinion, O'Connor's a really good depth piece, and he's a really good bottom six forward. He can play on the fourth or third line. I think he'll definitely live up to this $925,000 contract. So I think that's a really good deal for the Penguins to sign him to this sort of a deal. And I think getting a solid bottom six forward like O'Connor for the next couple of seasons at under $1 million, it's a fantastic deal for a Penguins team that really needs their cap space. So good signing there for the Penguins to get him signed for the next couple of seasons. And then lastly here, the other signing I want to talk about was one that didn't really involve any arbitration cases, and that was Rasmus Kupari, who was another piece of the Jets trade package from the Kings in the Pierre Dubois deal. They got Velarde, who they signed as an RFA. They got Iafallo, who signed for the next couple of years, and they got a second-round pick as well as Kupari. And Kupari was an RFA, and they signed Rasmus Kupari to a 2-year deal with an AAV of $1 million. So that's not a bad deal. In LA, Kupari had not really been yet established as a really solid player. He projects to be probably a good middle six forward, but at this current point in time, he was a bottom six forward / maybe a spare for the Kings. With the Jets having a little bit less roster depth than the Kings did, I do expect Kupari to get a little bit of a bigger role, so I wouldn't be surprised if he was like playing fourth or third line minutes consistently for the Jets. So I definitely think that 2-year deal, $1 million, is a really good deal for Kupari, and would not surprise me at all if he was able to live up to that contract. So solid deal there for the Jets, and then some solid arbitration cases, as with the Terry contract now being done, with the Scaling contract, McLeod contract, and O'Connor contract now being done, we are now done with the arbitration cases. There wound up being 22 players who filed for arbitration. There was also 2 players who were going to arbitration via club-elected arbitration, in Meyer and DeBrincat. Meyer signed with Jersey right after that was announced. DeBrincat was traded to Detroit and signed his new deal, so those 2 never went to arbitration. And of the 22 players who filed for arbitration, only 3 of them went to arbitration, in Swayman with Boston, Samsonov with Toronto, and Kurashev with Chicago. So pretty good things there, and good to see that 19 of the 22 players who filed for arbitration were able to settle before they had to go through the arbitration hearing. So good to see that, but we're now all done with the arbitration cases. There's still a couple of RFAs that did not have arbitration cases left. So even though the arbitration cases are done, there's still a handful of players left who are still RFAs and unsigned. If you look at the remaining RFAs, you have Trevor Zegras and Jamie Drysdale in Anaheim, 2 key pieces of that Ducks team. You also have Alexi Lafreniere in the Rangers organization. They don't have too much cap space, but they should be able to get enough to sign Lafreniere. They have Tim Burney in Columbus, who actually did really well as a third-pair defenseman for the Jackets, but is most likely a depth defenseman at this point for the Jackets. They also have Shane Pinto and Igor Sokolov in Ottawa. Pinto's going to be their third-line center. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, but they really need to sign him. Sokolov's a good bomb six forward who should be able to challenge for a roster spot this year. You have Logan Stanley and Declan Chisholm in Winnipeg. Both are really decent defensemen. Chisholm's going to need waivers this year, so there's some talk that he could be like a solid 7th defenseman for the Jets this year. Stanley still really seems like he wants out. There was a lot of talk about a trade request around the trade line last year, so I do wonder if he still wants out of Winnipeg, given the fact that they have a really deep defense. So it would not surprise me at all if they still wanted to possibly move him. The Edmonton Oilers still have Evan Bouchard and Noah Phillip. I don't think Phillip's going to sign a new deal, given the fact that he retired a little while ago. So the Oilers wanted to keep his signing rights, but I'm not sure if he'll even sign a contract. Bouchard's going to be really interesting to watch, given the fact that after McLeod signed, they only have about $3.5 million in cap space left. So it's going to be really interesting to see if they are able to sign Bouchard for under $3.5 million. On top of those ones, you also have Joe Veleno in Detroit, who's a really good third, fourth line center and looks to project to be a really good third line center long term. You also have Morgan Frost in Philadelphia, another really good second, third line center who could definitely be a really good piece in the puzzle there for Philly. Jan Jenik in Arizona, who's a really good fourth line center at this point in time for Arizona. And then you also have Kalen Addison in Minnesota, who's a really, really solid top-end right-shot defenseman. So, in my opinion, there's still some really good RFAs out there, and it'll be interesting to see when and if these guys are going to sign their new deals. So, you got Zegras, Lafreniere, Bernie, Drysdale, Pinto, Stanley, Veleno, Bouchard, Phillips, Sokolov, Chisholm, Frost, Jenik, and Addison. So you got 14 RFAs still left after all the arbitration cases are done, and it will be interesting to see when these 14 remaining guys sign their new deals. But that's all the signings I wanted to get to today. Next, we go over to the buyout rumor part of the video. Now, with all the arbitration cases done, we're going to have a lot of buyout windows about to open. So as we talked about earlier, the Arizona Coyotes buyout window starts yesterday and goes till tomorrow morning, and the Wild's buyout window begins today and goes till Saturday morning. We already went over that, how I really do think it's extremely unlikely that those two will buy out anyone, but we'll go over some of those other teams here. Now, we talked about Boston as well, who'll have their buyout window open tomorrow morning and will go until Sunday morning. The Rangers will also have a buyout window that opens tomorrow morning and goes till Sunday morning. So we already went over Boston. Very unlikely anyone gets bought out. I think the most likely, if I were to say one, would be DeBrusk or Charlie Coyle. But I would still think they're very, very valuable because Coyle could still be a good second-line center. DeBrusk is still a really good top six forward. And I think they'd be more valuable in a trade other than being bought out. So I still think it's extremely unlikely that the Bruins buy out anyone. If you look at the Rangers, who are also going to get a buyout window from tomorrow morning until Sunday morning, I also don't really see much in the way of them being able to buy out anyone. They have Panarin, who's making over $11 million, but he's a solid top six forward. They have Fox, who's making $9.5 million, but he's their best defenseman. They have Zibanejad, who's making $8.5 million, but he's their top center. They have Trouba, who's making $8 million, and is still a pretty good top four defenseman for them and their captain. They have Kreider, who's making $6.5 million. He's a solid 40-50 goal scorer, so they don't want to move him. You have Shesterkin, who's making $5.6 million. He's their starting goaltender. You have Trocheck, who's making $5.6 million. He's a decent second, third line center, but he's also signed for the next 6 years, so I don't really want to buy him out. And you also have Hedl, who's signed for $4.4 million for the next 4 seasons. So they're not going to buy any of those guys out, in my opinion. I think it's extremely unlikely. Like I said, if Barclay Goodrow was making just a tad more money and fit into that $4 million category, I think he would have been a prime buyout option, but he does make less than $4 million. So given that fact, he's not able to be bought out. I just don't see the Rangers buying out anyone. Now, the Oilers will be getting a buyout window from tomorrow night until Sunday night. So they'll get one from Friday night to Sunday night after they sign McLeod. And just like some of these other teams, they don't also have very many options. They're not buying out McDavid or Draisaitl, who are their top 2 forwards. They're not buying out Nurse. He's still, as much as he's not the best defenseman of that cap hit, he's still a really good top 4 defenseman. They're not buying out Ekholm, who they just acquired. They're not buying out Hyman or Kane or RNH, who are really good top 6 forwards. The one guy I think is remotely possible to be bought out is Jack Campbell, but he's still signed for the next 4 years at $5 million, and I think at this point the Oilers are intent on just running with a Campbell-Skinner tandem. So the only guy I could remotely possibly see would be Jack Campbell. Everyone else besides that I think is not going to be bought out, and I would not be too shocked if Edmonton did not buy out anyone. So I'd be really shocked if the Oilers did buy out anyone. But if there was one, I would say it would be Jack Campbell. And then from Saturday morning until Monday morning, the Penguins and the Ducks are going to have a buyout window. The Ducks are probably not going to be too much of an interesting team to watch, given the fact that they are just got over the salary cap floor. They do still have to sign, like I said, Zegras and Drysdale, which will take up a big chunk of their remaining cash. But they also still have a lot of money to work with. So I would not be shocked if the Ducks didn't buy out anyone. But they're not buying out Troy Terry, they're not buying out Cam Fowler, they're not buying out John Gibson or Alex Killorn. They're probably not buying out Strome, and they're also not buying out Gudas. The only two who I could see having a remote possibility of being bought out by the Ducks would be Adam Henrique or Jakob Silfverberg. Both make over $5 million. Silfverberg 5.25, Henrique 5.85. They're both entering the final year of their contract, so it wouldn't be a long buyout, and it would open up a roster spot for one of their younger players. So if they were to buy out someone, I would expect Henrique or Silfverberg. Unless it's one of those two, as I don't expect the Ducks to really buy out anyone. But the Penguins are going to be the team to watch here with the buyout window opening, as we'll get to possible ramifications of that in a second. But there's been a lot of talk ever since that the Penguins were interested in Karlsson that if they were to acquire Erik Karlsson, they need to buy out someone first to clear up that cap space. They're going to get that buyout window from Saturday morning to Monday morning. There's a legit chance that the Penguins are going to be able to buy out someone over that time frame. They're not buying out Crosby, they're not buying out Letang, they're not buying out Malkin, they're not buying out Gensel, they just signed Jerry, they're not buying out Rust, they're not buying out Raquel, they're not buying out Riley Smith, they're not buying out Ryan Graves. They're not buying out Marcus Peterson. Those guys are all safe. In my opinion, those guys are more valuable to them, either with their team or some of those other guys possibly via trade, than there are for being bought out. But the two guys who I think are the most likely to be bought out would be Jeff Petrie and would be Mikael Granlund. I think there's an extremely likely possibility that one or both of these guys could be bought out. Granlund's making $5 million for the next 2 seasons. Buying him out saves the Penguins $4.1 million this upcoming season, saves the Penguins $3.1 million next season, and then has a 2-year cap penalty the following 2 seasons at $1.8 million cap it. So from what I've seen from different sources, it sounds like he's the more likely to be bought out given the fact of how much cap savings they'll be able to get. But they could also buy out Jeff Petrie. Now the one big difference about the Petrie and Granlund contracts is Petrie has trade protection. I think he has like a 15-team no-trade list. Granlund doesn't have any trade protection, so if the Penguins wanted to move him to another team, he wouldn't be able to say no. Whereas if the Penguins wanted to move Petrie to a team like the Sharks, he could wind up saying no and not being traded to the Sharks. So it may, even though they get more cap savings with Granlund, it might make more sense to buy out Petrie given the fact that they have the ability to move Granlund anywhere. So buying out Petrie would save them $3.25 million of a $6.25 million cap hit for this upcoming season. It would save them $1.75 million on his contract for next season. And then it would leave a $1.25 million cap penalty for the next 2 seasons. So the cap penalty is less for Petrie over those 2 seasons afterwards, but wouldn't save them as much this year and next year as a Granlund buyout would. So going to be interesting to see, but I would extremely suspect that one of these 2 guys, or possibly both, are going to be bought out by the Pittsburgh Penguins during this time frame. So, I mean, if you look at this, they buy out Petrie, that's $3.25 million off their cap. They move Granlund, that's $5 million off their cap. That's another $8.25 million in cap space freed up. They move Petrie off their books and buy out Granlund. That's about $10.35 million in cap space freed up. So either way, they're going to have an ability here to buy out someone, and I would expect them to possibly buy out one of these 2 players. So keep your eyes on these 2 players. I think it's extremely likely that the Penguins do wind up buying out one of these 2 guys. So once again, Coyotes buyout window started yesterday and ends tomorrow. The Wild's buyout starts today and goes until Saturday. The Bruins and Rangers and Oilers buyouts will start tomorrow and go to Sunday. And the Ducks and Penguins buyouts will start on Saturday and go to Monday. And like I said, I expect Pittsburgh to make a buyout. I would not be too shocked if no one else made a buyout of these other teams who have their buyout window open. So, going to be interesting to see, but that's the buyout window update with all the art cases now closed. And lastly, here we go over to the trade rumor part of the video. So we'll start here with the St. Louis Blues. I've seen a couple of reports recently that the Blues are still looking to try and move a defenseman off their roster. We know they've been trying to do that all offseason. We know they were looking to move a defenseman closer to the trade deadline as well. There was a lot of talk at that point that a guy like Colin Parayko was out there, maybe even a guy like Torrey Krug, but no one was ever moved by the Blues on the defensive side for the Blues. So they went through the season without moving anyone, and then went into the offseason looking to move another defenseman. There was a lot of talk about Torrey Krug possibly being moved by the St. Louis Blues, and he never was. There was a big trade involving the Philadelphia Flyers that was supposed to send Torrey Krug to Philadelphia, but he wouldn't waive his no-movement clause to go there. So it really did set that trade back. All it was at the end of the day was Hayes was going to St. Louis for a 6th-round pick, and the bigger trade that was involved with Sanheim and a 1st-round pick and Krug was all foregone because Krug was not willing to move his no movement clause. So it's going to be interesting to see. But I definitely still think that the Blues could use a little bit of a shakeup on the blue line. If you look at their blue line right now, I think at this point in time, they're probably going to keep Parayko and hope that he has a bounce-back season this year. Falk's still a really good offensive defenseman. They have a young guy like Scott Perunovich, who I think could take some strides this year and be a solid regular NHL defenseman. You also have a good depth defenseman like Tyler Tucker, who's looked good. You have a good depth defenseman like Robert Bertuzzo, who's on a cheap contract. So the 3 most likely scenarios I could see being traded would be Marco Scandella, Nick Leddy, or Torrey Krug. Krug has, I think, 5 years left at $6.5 million, but once again, he has that no movement clause. So, given the fact he's already foregone a trade to Philadelphia, it'll be really interesting to see if he'd be able to be moved again. I think the Blues would really want to move Krug, but I'm not sure if Krug would want to be moved. So, it's going to be interesting to see, but I think Krug is the most likely candidate that the Blues want to move. But with this no trade clause, it may wind up not being able to happen. So if Krug's not the one who's going to be going, I think it's extremely likely that one of Leddy or Scandella go. Leddy's making $4 million for 2 or 3 more years. He's a solid second pair, third pair defenseman. He can play on the second pair. He's a decent defenseman. At that cap hit, I wouldn't be overly shocked if there weren't too many teams to look to acquire him. But he's still a decent defenseman, and I think there could be some interest in him. Scandella's a decent third pair defenseman. He's in the final year of his deal at $3.6 million, so that might be the best option for them to make some sort of defensive change, would be moving Marco Scandella to another team. They might not be able to get very much in return. They may only be able to get a depth pick for Scandella, given the fact that he's coming off a serious injury and he has a really bad cap hit for a role he plays. But I do think there would be some teams interested in a guy like Scandella. So, in my opinion, I think Scandella, Leddy, and Krug are the very most likely options for the Blues to clear cap space. And would not surprise me at all if those guys were the ones who wound up moving for the Blues. So, going to be interesting to see, but keep your eye on the Blues, as there's a really good chance that they still try and move a defenseman, and it seems like Krug, Leddy, and Scandella are the most likely to be moved. Going over to the Ottawa Senators, as we talked about with the RFA list, they still have to sign 2 players in Shane Pinto and Igor Sokolov. Now, Sokolov should not take too much of their money. He's only going to cost about $900,000, and he might not even make the NHL roster, so I don't think it'd be too worrisome for the Sens to sign Sokolov, but the big one is trying to sign Pinto. Pinto had a really good breakout season last year. He's definitely a really good third-line center. He played mostly in the second-line center position last year due to the Norris injury. But long-term, I think he's projected to be the third-line center on that team. So I definitely think that they would need to sign him to somewhere around a $2.5 to $3 million cap hit. They could probably sign him closer to $2 million on a 1-year deal, but if it was a 2 to 3 year deal, I would say it'd probably be between $2.5 and $3 million for Pinto. So it's going to be interesting to see what they have to do, because at this point in time, they only have around $900,000 in cap space. So signing Pinto to a $2.5 to $3 million deal is not really feasible at this point in time. So they'd have to move someone out in order to really get enough cap space. So it sounds like they could try and move someone in order to sign Pinto. There's been some talk about some options. The 2 most likely ones I see are Mathieu Joseph or Eric Brannstrom. For Joseph, he's most likely, after the additions that the Sens have made this year, will be on the 4th line. If Greg can really step into that top 9 role, I think that makes Mathieu Joseph expendable. As much as he's a really good forward, he's signed for the next couple of seasons at $2.95 million cap hit. Getting rid of him easily gives them enough cap space to sign Pinto. So I think Joseph's a really likely option to get traded. The other one would be Eric Brannstrom. Brannstrom's a decent third-pair defenseman. He was the key piece in the Mark Stone trade a couple of years back. He's really started to step into his own now as a solid third-pair defenseman. But if you look at the Sens defense, they have Sanderson, they have Chychrun, they have Zub, they have Shabbat. Hamnick can play a decent third-pair role. They have a guy like Bernard Docker, Lassie Thompson, Tyler Clevin, who are looking to get into new roles. So they have a lot of good depth on the defensive end, and they have a couple of good young players who I think could step into the role. So in my opinion, if Brannstrom were to be moved, I don't think it would be the end of the world. Moving his $2 million should be able to give them enough cap space to be able to sign a guy like Pinto. So definitely interested to see. Not saying it's imminent or anything, but I do think one of Mathieu Joseph or Eric Brannstrom will be dealt before the season starts, or to create enough cap space to sign Shane Pinto. And lastly here, with the Pittsburgh Penguins, could the Drew O'Connor domino be the first to fall of what's going to be most likely, in my opinion, could be a busy week for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Now, we've talked about it endlessly, about how the Penguins need to clear cap space to go after Karlsson. There's been a lot of talk that they could buy out someone after the Drew O'Connor contract was done. O'Connor's contract's now done. They're about to get a 48-hour buyout window. So if they're able to buy out either Petrie or Granlund or both, could that be the trigger that they need to go after a Karlsson or a Hanifin if they aren't able to get Karlsson? I think that's a really likely possibility. I think if they're able to buy out someone, clear enough cap space off the books to make it a little bit more palatable to take on Karlsson, I think it'll be extremely likely. Now, as we talked about, I think Pittsburgh is right now still a leading contender for Karlsson. I know that Toronto doesn't seem likely, Carolina doesn't seem likely. Well, Seattle does make sense. They haven't been mentioned in the last couple of weeks, so I don't think they're extremely likely. There could be some other teams there, like maybe Edmonton or Florida have checked in on Karlsson, but at this point in time, I don't think really anyone else is really interested. So I really, at this point, think it's most likely Pittsburgh or no one else. So if they're going to make this trade happen, I think it's going to happen. And in my opinion, I think it's going to happen soon. If Pittsburgh were to acquire Karlsson, I think it would have to wait until after these guys are either traded or bought out. I think that's basically the biggest hurdle for the Penguins. So on top of trying to get the trade package that both the Penguins and the Sharks can agree on, they also don't have enough cap space to bring him in. So whether they buy out Petrie or they buy out Granlund, I fully expect one of those two guys to be bought out over that 2-day period where they get the buyout window. But definitely, I do expect one of those Penguins to be bought out. And once they get bought out, it would not shock me at all if in the next couple of days there were a lot of talks leading around Karlsson trade to Pittsburgh. So I would not be too shocked if the first domino to fall would be the Drew O'Connor contract. That would lead to the buyout domino falling, and that would lead to an Erik Karlsson trade. So, going to be interesting to see, but I think that there is a very likely chance that now that O'Connor's contract's done, they're about to get a buyout window, we could see a Karlsson trade in the next couple of either days or weeks. And I think the Sharks really do want to get this over with. They don't want it to become a distraction to start the season. We know Karlsson doesn't want to go back to San Jose. And I think if the Penguins can clear up some cap space, work out a price tag for Karlsson, they work out how much money the Sharks are going to retain, I think they should be able to get something done. So, in my opinion, I think that's the best and most likely way that this goes. But it's going to be interesting to see. So, going to be interesting to see, but I definitely think that after the Penguins buy out someone, there's an extremely likely possibility that we see a Karlsson trade not too long after. So, going to be interesting to see, but definitely let me know down in the comments what you think on all that was discussed here today. Do you see any of those teams using their buyout window? Do you see the Blues moving a defenseman before the season starts, whether it be Scandella, Lalletti, or Krug? Do you see the Senators moving a player? And do you see Joseph or Brannstrom being one of the guys they need to move in order to sign Pinto? And do you think that the Drew O'Connor contract will be the first domino to fall and what could possibly wind up being an Erik Karlsson trade? Definitely let me know what you think down in the comments. That's all I'm going to talk about here today. Remember to like this video, and if you really liked it, remember to subscribe down below. I also do a blog talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that, so definitely check that out. I leave a link to that in the description below, and I can't wait to see you guys all for the next video. See you guys soon.